The Desert Inn showroom was packed on February 14th, 1964. Valentine's Day in Las Vegas meant couples from across the country, high rollers looking to impress their dates, and the usual collection of connected guys who treated the strip like their personal playground. Dean Martin was headlining, 3 shows a night, and every seat was filled. Dean was in the middle of That's Amore, his voice smooth and effortless when he heard it. A voice from a front table, loud enough to carry over the music, slurred with alcohol and dripping with contempt. "He can't really sing, it's all studio tricks." Dean kept singing, but his eyes found the source. A heavy-set man in an expensive suit, probably mid-40s, with slicked back hair and the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. His table had 5 other men, all dressed similarly, all watching to see what their boss would do next. Dean finished the verse, and the band kept playing, but the voice came again, louder this time. "I'm serious. Take away the studio, take away the microphone tricks, and Dean Martin can't sing worth a damn." The showroom went uncomfortable. This wasn't playful heckling, this was something else. This was a man with power trying to demonstrate it by tearing down someone who couldn't fight back, or so he thought. As Dean stopped singing, the band continued for a few more bars, then trailed off when they realized Dean wasn't coming back in. The silence in the room was absolute. Dean looked directly at the heckler's table. "You think I can't sing?" The man leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, smiling. "I know you can't sing. You're a personality, your charm and looks and studio production. But real singing, technical singing, you're nothing special." Dean set the microphone back in its stand and walked to the edge of the stage. "What's your name?" Anthony Collucci." "And yeah, I know who you are, Dean Martin. Everyone knows who you are. But knowing who you are and being impressed by what you do, those are 2 different things. You sing, Anthony?" Anthony laughed, and his crew laughed with him. "I sing better than you do, that's for sure." "Really?" Dean's voice was calm, almost amused. "You sing better than me. In my shower, with no microphone, no band, no studio tricks. Yeah, I probably do, because I actually have a voice. You have a persona." The audience was transfixed. This was beyond heckling now. This was an open challenge, and everyone wanted to see how Dean Martin would respond. Dean looked at Anthony for a long moment. Then he smiled, that particular Dean Martin smile, the one that never quite reached his eyes, but suggested he knew something you didn't. "Come up here." Anthony blinked. "What? You heard me. Come up on stage. Let's find out if you sing better than me." The room erupted in murmurs. Anthony's crew was looking at him, waiting to see what he'd do. He'd backed himself into a corner. If he refused, he looked like a coward. If he accepted, well, nobody knew what would happen if he accepted. Anthony stood up. He was a big man, probably 6 feet tall and 250 pounds. He buttoned his suit jacket, straightened his tie, and walked toward the stage with the swagger of someone who'd never lost a confrontation in his life. Dean extended his hand and helped Anthony up onto the stage. The crew set up a second microphone stand. The audience was silent, waiting. "What do you want to sing?" Dean asked. Anthony looked at the band. "You guys know Volare?" The band leader nodded. They knew it. Everyone knew it. It was one of the biggest hits of the late 50s, an Italian song that had crossed over to American pop success. "Perfect," Dean said. "You sing Volare, and then I'll sing it. The audience can decide who sings better. Sound fair?" Anthony nodded. "Sounds fair. But," Dean added, his voice still calm, still friendly, "we sing it the same way. No studio tricks, like you said. No special effects. Just voice and band. You do your best. I'll do mine, and we'll let these 1,500 people tell us who actually can sing." Anthony looked confident. "Deal." The band started the intro to Volare. The familiar melody filled the showroom. Anthony gripped the microphone, waited for his cue, and began singing. He had a voice, not a great voice, not a professional voice, but a decent amateur voice. He could carry a tune. He knew the words. He sang with enthusiasm and confidence. For a civilian, for someone who wasn't a professional entertainer, he was actually pretty good. The audience applauded politely when he finished. Anthony smiled, clearly pleased with himself. He looked at Dean. "Your turn." Dean stepped up to his microphone. He nodded to the band, and they started the intro again. But Dean didn't sing right away. He let the music play, let the anticipation build. And when he finally opened his mouth and the first notes came out, something changed in the room. Dean wasn't just singing, he was inhabiting the song. His voice, rich, warm, controlled, filled every corner of the showroom. He wasn't performing volume or power, he was performing emotion. Every note was perfectly placed, every phrase was shaped with intention. The Italian lyrics came out with authentic pronunciation and feeling. But more than technical skill, there was something else. There was the thing that separates professionals from amateurs, stars from civilians. Dean was telling a story. He was making you feel something. He was taking a song everyone had heard 1,000 times and making it sound like he'd written it yesterday, specifically for this moment. The audience wasn't just listening, they were mesmerized. Women were swaying in their seats, men were nodding along. Even Anthony's crew, who'd come to support their boss, were watching Dean with something like awe. When Dean finished, the applause was thunderous. Not polite applause like Anthony had received. Real applause. The kind that goes on because people can't stop clapping, because they need to release the emotion the performance created in them. Dean waited for the applause to die down. Then he turned to Anthony. "Still think I can't sing?" Anthony's face was red. His swagger was gone. He stood there holding the microphone like he didn't know what to do with it. Dean didn't gloat. He didn't mock. His voice stayed friendly, almost sympathetic. "Here's the thing, Anthony. You can sing. I heard you. You've got a decent voice. You hit the notes. You know the words. In your shower, in your car, at parties with your friends. I bet you sound pretty good." Dean paused. "But what you heard me do? That's not studio tricks. That's not microphone effects. That's 30 years of training, practice, and experience. That's understanding phrasing, breath control, dynamics, emotion. That's knowing how to interpret a song, not just sing the notes." The room was silent, listening to Dean's explanation like it was part of the show. "When you said I can't really sing, what you meant was you don't understand the difference between singing and performing, between hitting notes and telling stories, between being technically correct and being emotionally true. And that's okay. Most people don't understand the difference until they hear it demonstrated." Dean gestured to Anthony. "You just heard it demonstrated. You sang the same song I sang. Same band, same arrangement, same microphone, same room. But what came out was different. Not because I'm using tricks, but because I've spent my entire adult life learning how to do this." Anthony was looking at the floor now. The confidence was completely gone. Dean continued, his voice gentle. "So here's what I want you to understand, Anthony. When you're in an audience and you think I could do that, what you're actually thinking is that looks easy. And the reason it looks easy is because the performer has worked so hard to make it look easy. But easy and simple are not the same thing." Dean looked out at the audience. "How many of you have ever watched a professional athlete and thought, I could do that? Basketball, golf, baseball, whatever. You see them on TV and it looks simple. But then you try it and you realize there are levels of skill you didn't even know existed." People in the audience were nodding. They got it. "That's what happened here tonight," Dean said. "Anthony thought singing was just opening your mouth and making sounds that match the melody. And technically that's correct. But professional singing, the kind that makes people pay money to hear you, is about 1,000 other things that you don't notice unless you're trained to notice them." Dean turned back to Anthony. "So no hard feelings. You came up here, you sang your heart out, and you learned something. That takes guts." The audience, give Anthony a round of applause for having the courage to come up here. The audience applauded. It was genuine applause, not mocking. Anthony had been humiliated, but Dean was giving him a way to leave the stage with some dignity. Anthony shook Dean's hand. "You're right. I'm sorry I said you couldn't sing. I didn't understand what I was talking about." "Most people don't," Dean said kindly. "That's why they pay us to do it instead of doing it themselves." Anthony walked off stage, back to his table. His crew quiet now. The swagger was gone, but he wasn't destroyed. Dean had made his point without cruelty. Dean turned back to the audience. "Now, where were we? Oh, right, I was singing That's Amore before I got interrupted by a music critic." The audience laughed. The tension broke, and Dean launched back into his set like nothing had happened. But something had happened. Everyone in that room had just witnessed a masterclass in how to handle a challenge with grace, skill, and just enough humility to make the other person feel human. After the show, Dean was in his dressing room when there was a knock. It was Anthony Collucci, alone this time. "Mr. Martin, can I talk to you for a minute?" Dean gestured to a chair. "Sure. Want a drink?" "No, thank you." Anthony sat down, looking uncomfortable. "I wanted to apologize properly. What I said during your show, that was disrespectful and wrong." "You were drunk," Dean said simply. "People say stupid things when they're drunk. I wasn't that drunk. I was showing off for my crew, being a big shot, and I picked you to make myself look important." Anthony looked at Dean. "You could have destroyed me up there, could have made me look like a complete fool. But you didn't. You made your point and let me keep some dignity." "Why?" Dean poured himself a drink. "Because humiliating you wouldn't have proven anything except that I can be cruel. What I wanted to prove was that I actually can sing. Those are two different goals." "You proved it," Anthony said. "I sounded like an amateur up there compared to you." "You are an amateur compared to me," Dean said without arrogance, just stating fact. "I've been doing this since I was a teenager. I've sung in nightclubs, on the radio, in movies, on television, in recording studios. I've sung with orchestras and jazz bands and small combos. I've sung in perfect acoustic environments and terrible ones. I've learned from the best singers in the business. That's not talent, that's work. But you make it look so easy. That's the work too. Making it look easy is actually the hardest part." Dean took a sip of his drink. "You know what the real difference is between me and you, Anthony? It's not that I have more talent. Talent is common. The difference is that I've put in 10,000 hours of practice that you haven't. And those hours taught me things about singing that you can't learn by listening to records or singing in your car." Anthony nodded slowly. "What you did up there, letting me sing, then singing the same song, that was a teaching moment, wasn't it? Not just for me, for the whole audience." "I guess it was," Dean admitted. "I wanted people to understand that what I do isn't magic or tricks. It's craft, it's skill, it's work. Because when people think it's just natural talent or studio effects, they don't respect the work that goes into it." "I respect it now," Anthony said. He stood up, extended his hand. "Thank you for not making me look worse than I already made myself look." Dean shook his hand. "You came up on stage when I challenged you. That took guts. Most people would have made excuses and stayed in their seat, so you've got courage. That's worth something." After Anthony left, Dean sat alone for a moment. His road manager came in. "That was risky, Dean. Bringing a mob guy up on stage like that. What if he'd gotten angry? What if he'd made a scene?" "Then I would have handled it," Dean said. "But I knew he wouldn't. Once he was up there, once he was in my world, he was going to play by my rules. The stage is my territory. Out there in the showroom, sitting at his table with his crew, he had the power. But the moment he stepped on stage, I had it. Still risky, maybe, but it was worth it." Dean stood up, stretched. "How many people in that audience do you think go home tonight with a different understanding of what professional singing actually is?" "Probably all of them." "Then it was worth it." The story of what happened that Valentine's Day spread through Las Vegas within hours. Not the version where Dean humiliated a mob guy. The real version where Dean had given a music lesson disguised as a confrontation, where he'd proven his skill without cruelty, where he'd educated an audience about the difference between amateur and professional. Other performers heard the story and felt something shift. For years they'd dealt with audience members who didn't understand the work that went into performance, who thought it was all natural talent or technical tricks, who believed they could do it themselves if they just had the opportunity. Dean had found a way to demonstrate the difference, not by telling people they were wrong, but by showing them, by putting an amateur and a professional side by side, singing the same song and letting the audience hear the difference with their own ears. In 1968, Dean was doing an interview for a music magazine. The interviewer asked about his vocal technique, his training, his approach to singing. "You make it sound so effortless," the interviewer said. "But it's not effortless, is it? God, no, Dean laughed. It's incredibly effortful. It's just that the effort is invisible. That's the whole point. You work for years to make the work invisible so that the audience can just experience the emotion without thinking about the technique. Is there a moment when you realized people didn't understand that? Dean thought about it. Yeah, February 14th, 1964. A guy in my audience accused me of not being able to really sing, said it was all studio tricks, and I realized he genuinely believed that. Not because he was stupid, but because he didn't understand the difference between singing and professional singing. What did you do? I put him on stage, and we sang the same song. Him first, then me, and everyone in the room heard the difference. That's when I understood that sometimes you have to demonstrate your skill, not just claim it. Did it change how you perform? In a way, I became more aware of making my technique visible occasionally. Not constantly, that would ruin the illusion. But every once in a while, I'll do something that shows the control, the breath work, the phrasing choices, just to remind people that what they're hearing isn't accidental. The interviewer smiled. I heard a rumor that the guy you put on stage was connected. Is that true? I don't talk about who's connected and who isn't, Dean said diplomatically. But I will say this, it doesn't matter who someone is off stage. Once they're on stage, they're either a performer or they're not. And if they're not, no amount of money or power or connections can make them one. Years later, in 1983, a vocal coach named Michael Stein was teaching a masterclass at a music conservatory. He told his students the story of Dean Martin and Anthony Collucci. What Dean did that night was brilliant pedagogy, Stein explained. He could have just told the guy he was wrong. He could have argued, defended himself, listed his credentials, but instead he created a live demonstration that proved his point undeniably. He let the skill speak for itself. One student raised her hand. But wasn't that cruel? Putting an amateur on stage to embarrass him? That's the thing, Stein said. Dean didn't embarrass him. Dean sang after him, demonstrated the difference, and then explained it kindly. He gave the guy dignity. He made it a teaching moment, not a humiliation. That's the mark of real confidence. You can prove you're skilled without destroying the person who doubted you. Another student asked, "Do you think Dean was angry when the guy said he couldn't sing?" Stein thought about it. I think Dean was frustrated, not angry. Frustrated that someone could watch him perform and not understand the work that went into it. And he found a way to turn that frustration into education. That's mastery, not just of singing, but of human interaction. The story became part of vocal pedagogy lore. Teachers would tell it to students who thought singing was just natural talent or who didn't understand why they had to practice scales and breathing exercises and phrasing. Because Dean Martin had created a perfect demonstration of the difference between amateur and professional, between hitting notes and telling stories, between singing correctly and singing meaningfully. Anthony Collucci, for his part, never lived it down with his crew. They teased him mercilessly about the night he challenged Dean Martin to a sing-off and got schooled. But Anthony took it in stride. He'd tell the story himself, usually ending with, "I learned that night that there's a difference between doing something and doing something well. And Dean Martin taught me that lesson without being cruel about it, which took more class than I probably deserved." In 1992, Anthony was dying of cancer in a hospital in Detroit. His daughter was with him, and they were talking about memories, about moments that mattered. Anthony brought up the Dean Martin story. "I embarrassed myself that night," Anthony said. "Stood up drunk and challenged one of the greatest singers in the world. But you know what I remember most? Not the embarrassment. I remember Dean's kindness. He could have destroyed me. Instead, he taught me something." "What did he teach you?" his daughter asked. "That expertise is real. That the difference between amateur and professional isn't just marketing or luck. It's work. Years and years of work that becomes invisible when it's done right. And that someone who's truly skilled doesn't need to be cruel to prove it. They can just demonstrate." His daughter squeezed his hand. "Did you ever see him perform again?" "And yeah, every time he was in Detroit after that, I went to his show, sat in the back, never made a scene, just listened. And every time I heard things I hadn't heard before. Little choices he made, little technical things that you only notice if you're listening for them. And I'd think, that's what he tried to show me that night. that what looks effortless is actually full of 1,000 tiny decisions that only an expert knows how to make. Anthony died 2 weeks later. His daughter wrote a letter to Dean Martin, telling him about her father's last days, about how he'd talked about that night in 1964, about how much he'd respected Dean for handling it with grace. Dean was 75 by then, retired from performing, living quietly in Beverly Hills. He wrote back to Anthony's daughter, "Your father did something brave that night. He accepted my challenge and came up on stage even though he knew he'd probably look bad compared to me. That takes courage, and afterwards he apologized, which takes humility. Those qualities, courage and humility, are rarer than singing talent. Please know that I never thought less of him for what happened. I respected him for being willing to learn." The letter became a family treasure. Anthony's daughter framed it and hung it in her home, a reminder that even in moments of failure or embarrassment, dignity can be preserved if both parties choose grace over cruelty. When Dean Martin died in 1995, the obituaries focused on his singing, his movies, his television show, his place in the Rat Pack. But among vocal coaches, music teachers, and people who thought seriously about performance, they remembered him for something else, for being a master of his craft who understood that true expertise doesn't need cruelty to prove itself. The story of the night Dean put a heckler on stage and destroyed him became legend, but the real story was more nuanced. Dean had proven his skill, yes. He'd demonstrated the vast difference between amateur and professional. But he'd done it without humiliation, without mockery, without using his power to crush someone weaker. That's the lesson that lasted, that you can win a confrontation and leave your opponent with dignity, that you can prove you're right without making the other person feel worthless. That true mastery is as much about how you treat people as it is about your technical skill. Dean Martin could sing, really sing, not because of studio tricks or microphone effects or natural talent alone, but because he'd spent 30 years learning his craft, practicing it, refining it, making the work invisible so the audience could just feel the emotion. And on February 14th, 1964, he proved it in a way that no one who was there ever forgot. Not by claiming it, not by arguing it, but by demonstrating it and then explaining it kindly to someone who hadn't understood. That's not just good singing, that's mastery of human connection. And in the end, that might have been Dean Martin's greatest skill, not just making beautiful sounds, but understanding how to use those sounds to teach, to move, to connect with people in ways that lasted long after the music stopped. Anthony Collucci learned that lesson. The audience learned it. And decades later, people are still learning it from a story about a night when a mob boss said Dean Martin couldn't really sing. And Dean responded not with anger, but with proof, not with cruelty, but with kindness, not with destruction, but with education. That's the real story. Not that Dean destroyed someone, but that he elevated a moment of conflict into a moment of understanding. And that more than any perfect note or flawless phrasing is what made him legendary,